Ever since the first blue giant stepped onto the screen, we knew James Cameron was playing the long game with Pandora. But now that Fire and Ash has officially dropped, it feels like we are standing at a massive crossroads for the entire sci-fi genre. And the internet exploded overnight. Not just the usual hype you'd expect from a James Cameron epic, but real debates, hot takes, and a wave of critics calling it the weakest chapter of the saga so far. And yeah, on paper that sounds rough. But once you actually sit down and experience Fire and Ash, it becomes clear that things aren't nearly that simple. Let's be honest, Avatar was never about some mind-bending, twist-heavy plot. From day one, it's been a straightforward story about duty, love, family, and choosing a side, all wrapped inside one of the most jaw-dropping sci-fi worlds ever put on screen. Even back in 2009, people joked that Cameron basically remade Pocahontas in space, and he never really denied it. What made Avatar a phenomenon wasn't originality in storytelling, it was the visuals, that insane CGI leap, the feeling that you were actually standing inside Pandora. The script itself had been written way back in the early 90s, but Cameron had to wait years until the technology finally caught up with his vision, and the result was history. People went to see it again and again just for the experience, and that wow factor turned into billions at the box office and a blank check for sequels. Then we waited 13 years for The Way of Water. Visually, it was stunning. The oceans of Pandora, the sea clans, the underwater creatures, all of it felt like a tech demo from the future. But story-wise, you could already feel that the saga was moving forward very carefully, almost too carefully. It crossed 2 billion as well, but critics were a bit cooler this time. And now we have Fire and Ash, currently the lowest rated of the trilogy, and with a softer opening weekend than the first two. With a budget pushing close to 600 million including marketing, this thing basically needs to make $1 billion just to break even. Still, nobody really doubts it will get there. It's Avatar. Cameron always plays the long game. From a pure visual standpoint, Fire and Ash is still one of the most impressive movies you can watch today. Pandora looks incredible. The new environments, the creatures, the Ash Clan, all of it feels massive and detailed. The action scenes are bigger, louder, more chaotic, with battles in the air, on land, and through fire and smoke. Cameron clearly squeezed every dollar out of that budget. There are also way more first-person shots this time around, which makes some sequences feel like a full-on theme park ride. It's intense, immersive, and built for the biggest screen you can find. Where the criticism starts to make sense is when people talk about the lack of a big visual leap compared to Part 2. It looks amazing, but it doesn't shock you the way the first Avatar did, or even the water tech in the second. At this point, it's hard to imagine what could truly top what Cameron has already shown. So instead of another revolution, this feels more like perfection of what's already there. Some even say Pandora looks a bit too clean, almost cartoonish in places. I wouldn't go that far, but I get where that feeling comes from. Story-wise, the biggest issue is that Fire and Ash leans heavily into familiar territory. From the trailers alone, you could tell we were getting the same core heroes, the same type of conflict, and a very recognizable structure. After some cast interviews, there was hope that Cameron had a crazy twist up his sleeve that would flip the whole franchise on its head. Without spoiling anything, let's just say that if you've watched enough movies, you'll probably guess where things are headed pretty early on. But honestly, that's never been the main selling point of Avatar. Nobody goes into this expecting a Tenet-level brain teaser. It's a linear saga that's slowly pushing its characters toward an ending, and in that sense, Fire and Ash stays true to what the franchise has always been. The new antagonists do bring some fresh flavor. The Mankwang clan led by Varang, played by Una Chaplin, stands out as the most solidly written villain the series has had so far. She's not evil just for the sake of it. Her motivations make sense within her worldview, and that makes her interesting to watch. Even so, by the time the film reaches its final act, her arc feels a bit rushed, like there was more depth planned that didn't fully make it to the screen. The Wind Traders, on the other hand, barely get any time to shine and are easy to forget, which is a shame considering how cool the concept is. All that said, calling Fire and Ash a failure would be ridiculous. It's still a huge cinematic experience. Critics may want deeper drama, heavier themes, and sharper social commentary in everything these days, but Avatar has always been, first and foremost, the story of the Sully family set against a breathtaking alien world. And as a theatrical event, it absolutely delivers. Audience scores reflect that too. Regular viewers seem to be way more in sync with this movie than the critics are. It's one of those films that reminds you why movie theaters exist in the first place. Now here's where things get really interesting, the ending, and the twist that quietly changes the rules of the entire universe. Not long ago, Cameron openly said he wasn't even sure if Avatar 4 and 5 would happen. He kept dodging direct answers, explaining that everything depends on how Part 3 performs financially. Just in case, he made sure Fire and Ash could work as a potential ending for the whole saga. And honestly, you can feel that. The finale ties up most of the big arcs and mirrors the first film in a lot of ways. Spider fully becomes one of the Na'vi. Neytiri finally accepts him as her son. Kiri learns the truth about where she comes from. And in the last moments, we see the fallen characters from previous films, giving the story a sense of closure. It really does feel like a final chapter. But not everything is wrapped up. Spider's new status turns him into the most valuable asset on Pandora for the humans. The humans themselves aren't fully driven off the planet this time, unlike in the first movie. Only part of their military force is defeated. And key figures like Quaritch and Varung are left in a very suspicious state, with no clear confirmation of death. It's classic Cameron, leaving just enough threads dangling. And according to insiders, Avatar 4 is already greenlit. It's set to arrive in about 4 years, and most of the first act is apparently already filmed. There will be a time jump, and Kiri will take over as the main narrator. That alone tells you a lot about where the story is heading. Studio execs reportedly had zero issues with Cameron's script, which means his original vision is staying intact. And that vision seems to revolve around Kiri and Spider. By now, we know Kiri is genetically identical to Grace's avatar. She has no biological father. She's essentially a clone, conceived in a completely unprecedented way when Grace's avatar became pregnant during the failed attempt to transfer Grace's human consciousness. While connected to Awa somehow placed a seed of life inside the avatar body, leading to Kiri's birth. That's why her connection to Awa is so strong and why her abilities feel almost divine. She doesn't just understand Pandora, she feels it. And in Fire and Ash, we see her take that a step further by altering Spider's DNA, giving him the ability to breathe Pandora's air. That's massive. It basically confirms Kiri as a chosen figure, an embodiment of Awa's will, and sets her up as the key player in the future of the planet. Because now, the fight changes. Humans aren't just after resources anymore. Spider becomes the focus. His new ability could allow humans to walk freely on Pandora without masks, opening the door to full-scale colonization. Years ago, it was announced that Michelle Yeoh would join the cast as a human scientist named Karina Moog. It adds a sophisticated layer to the human side of the story that we haven't seen since the days of Grace. There is a lot of speculation among the fan community that her character will be the one to investigate the biological breakthrough Kiri achieved with Spider. If a human can be genetically or spiritually altered to breathe the air of Pandora without a mask, then the entire motivation for the RDA changes from resource extraction to full-scale colonization. This would allow thousands of humans to walk onto the planet unprotected, which effectively turns the tide of the war and forces the Na'vi to deal with a permanent human presence that cannot simply be sent back to a dying Earth. And come on, you don't cast Michelle Yeoh for a tiny side role. My bet is that her character will be the one to study Spider, crack the code behind his transformation, and adapt it for humanity. That could be the core of Avatar 4, humans returning stronger, smarter, and more prepared than ever. By the end of that film, I can easily see humans gaining the ability to breathe on Pandora en masse, which would naturally lead straight into the central conflict of Avatar 5. There were rumors before that the final movie would take place on Earth, showing the war brought back home. But what if that was misunderstood? What if the real idea is that Earth brings itself to Pandora, entire colonies of humans settling there, turning the planet into the ultimate battleground between humans and Na'vi? It makes more sense. Pandora is the world Cameron has spent decades building in insane detail. Abandoning it for a dying Earth would feel wrong. The whole franchise has always been about natives versus invaders, about finding balance instead of total domination. That theme runs straight through the history of America itself, and Avatar has never been subtle about those parallels. The whole narrative arc of this franchise seems to be moving toward a massive biological and cultural synthesis that most people are completely overlooking. When you look at the DNA of the story, it is not just about a war between two different species, but rather the slow and steady blurring of the lines between human and Na'vi. It started with Jake, who was a literal human marine before he fully transitioned into his blue body, and that set the precedent for everything we are seeing now. Then we have Kiri, who is basically the ultimate hybrid, being since she carries the genetic markers of grace, while essentially acting as the physical avatar for the planetary consciousness of Awa herself. Now, with Spider undergoing this radical transformation and becoming one of the people in a physical sense, it feels like the barrier between the two worlds is dissolving entirely. There is a lot of talk about the future of the series beyond the 5th installment, and the idea of Cameron finally stepping back to let new creators take the reins is both exciting and terrifying. He has spent decades obsessing over every leaf and every creature on this moon, and seeing him hand over the keys to a 6th or 7th movie would be a massive shift in cinematic history. For that to happen, the current film and the upcoming 4th chapter have to prove that the audience is still hungry for this world despite the skeptical critics and the shifting trends in the industry. The sheer financial weight of an $800 million budget means there is zero room for error, and the franchise needs to keep hitting those billion-dollar milestones just to justify its own existence. I honestly believe that the reason we are seeing so much pushback right now is that the story is in its awkward teenage phase where it is setting up massive stakes that won't pay off for another few years. If my theory about the biological integration of humans into the Pandoran ecosystem is correct, then we are witnessing the birth of a new kind of science fiction epic. We are moving past the simple good versus evil tropes and entering a space where the characters are literally evolving into a new species. Whether the general public stays for the whole ride is the big gamble, but for those of us who appreciate the granular details of the lore, it feels like we are on the verge of something truly transcendent. The legacy of this story will likely be defined by how well it handles this transition from a war movie to a story about universal harmony and the literal merging of two worlds. One of the most exciting aspects of the Avatar 4 is the confirmed exploration of brand new biomes that will take us far away from the tropical jungles and reefs. Cameron has hinted that we are finally going to see the Arctic and Antarctic regions of Pandora, where snow and ice will create a completely different visual experience for the audience. This expansion into the frozen corners of the moon suggests that the war with the RDA is becoming a global event that affects every clan regardless of their environment. Everything we know points toward a much darker and more complex generational epic where the children have to fix the world their parents broke. The rumored title has been circulating as the Tulkun rider for quite a while, and though titles can shift during post-production, it strongly suggests that the bond between the Na'vi and the sentient sea giants will be the key to surviving the next wave of human expansion. This movie is a massive gamble for the studio, but with Cameron at the helm, it feels like we are witnessing the birth of a modern mythology that will redefine sci-fi for the next decade.